March 1944. A French resistance operative sits in a cafe in Lyon, waiting for contact with a Gestapo informant who has offered intelligence on upcoming raids. The informant arrives, nervous, clutching a leather satchel. They exchange minimal conversation. The operative produces a cigarette, then reaches into his coat pocket for what appears to be a mechanical pencil to make notes. The informant relaxes slightly. Note-taking suggests legitimate business discussion. The operative holds the pencil horizontally, aims it across the table at the informant's chest, and presses the clip. A .22 caliber bullet fires through a nearly silent chemical propellant charge, traveling at approximately 200 meters per second. The sound is comparable to snapping fingers. The informant slumps forward. Other cafe patrons notice nothing for several seconds. No visible weapon, no gunshot report, no obvious threat. The operative pockets the pencil, leaves payment for his coffee, and walks out before anyone realizes what has occurred. The weapon that killed the informant looked identical to thousands of mechanical pencils carried throughout occupied France. It was designated the Stinger, and British intelligence distributed them, knowing most would kill exactly once before the carrier was identified and executed. The problem facing the Special Operations Executive in 1943 was immediate and tactical. Resistance networks across occupied Europe required weapons for close-range elimination of targets in public spaces where conventional firearms would draw immediate attention and result in the operative's capture or death. Standard SOE weapons, including the well-rod suppressed pistol and silenced Sten variants, were effective but required concealment until the moment of use and produced enough noise to alert nearby German personnel. Knives required physical proximity and strength, creating opportunities for resistance or alarm. Poison was unreliable in timing and required access to food or drink. What field operatives needed was a weapon that appeared completely innocuous, that could be aimed and fired without revealing itself as a weapon until after discharge, that made minimal sound, and that could kill reliably at conversational distance. The specifications seemed to violate fundamental principles of firearms design. A lethal weapon cannot appear to be something else entirely without sacrificing effectiveness. Suppression requires length and mass. Lethality requires projectile energy. Concealment requires minimal size. These requirements were contradictory. The Stinger attempted to reconcile them through extreme miniaturization and chemical innovation. Development occurred at Station 9, SOE's experimental weapons facility located at the Fryve Mansion in Hertfordshire. The lead designer was Major Charles Clark, an engineer with a background in miniature mechanisms and chemical propellants. Clark's team approached the problem by eliminating every conventional firearms component that contributed to size or signature. A standard pistol used a mechanical firing pin, a metallic cartridge case, gunpowder propellant, and a barrel of sufficient length to stabilize the projectile. Each element added bulk and produced noise or flash. The Stinger eliminated the firing pin using electrical ignition. It eliminated the metallic case using a compressed chemical propellant cylinder. It reduced barrel length to effectively zero, relying on extremely short range for terminal effect rather than ballistic stability. The result was a weapon measuring 140 millimeters in length and 10 millimeters in diameter, indistinguishable from a standard mechanical pencil. The mechanism was elegantly simple. The body was a machined aluminum tube, anodized to match the commercial pencil finish. The internal structure consisted of a battery cell, ignition coil, propellant charge chamber, and barrel tube of approximately 35 millimeters length, chambered for .22 short ammunition. The firing sequence required pressing the pocket clip, which completed an electrical circuit. The circuit energized the ignition coil, which heated a filament embedded in the propellant charge. The charge was not gunpowder, but a compressed mixture of nitrous cellulose and potassium chlorate that burned progressively rather than detonating. This chemical burned more slowly and cooler than conventional propellant, producing less gas volume and therefore less noise. The burning propellant generated pressure behind a .22 caliber bullet seated in the barrel tube. The bullet accelerated through the short barrel and exited at approximately 200 meters per second, roughly half the velocity of standard .22 ammunition fired from a conventional pistol. Muzzle energy was approximately 40 joules, substantially less than any military cartridge, but adequate for lethal effect at contact distance. The sound signature was the weapon's most critical characteristic. Conventional .22 pistols produce approximately 140 decibels at the muzzle. The Stinger produced approximately 95 decibels, comparable to a hand clap or the sound of a book closing firmly. At 3 meters, the report was difficult to identify as gunfire. At 5 meters, it was easily masked by ambient cafe or street noise. This suppression was achieved entirely through slow-burning propellant chemistry rather than mechanical baffles. The absence of a traditional suppressor mechanism meant the weapon remained pencil-sized. Testing at Station IX demonstrated that operatives could fire the Stinger in a room full of people, and only those within 2 meters would clearly recognize that a weapon discharge had occurred. Those further away might notice a sound, but would not immediately identify it as threatening. Operational deployment began in late 1943 with limited distribution to SOE agents in France and the Low Countries. The Stinger was never issued widely. Production numbers remain partially classified, but estimates suggest fewer than 500 units were manufactured. Each agent received the weapon with explicit instructions regarding its limitations. The effective range was listed as 2 meters maximum. Beyond this distance, accuracy was unpredictable and stopping power was insufficient. The .22 caliber projectile would not reliably penetrate heavy winter clothing or strike vital organs unless fired at extremely close range. Agents were instructed to aim for the head or upper chest at conversational distance, to fire once, and to immediately withdraw before the target's collapse drew attention. Reloading was theoretically possible, but required disassembly and was not practical in operational conditions. The Stinger was effectively a single-shot weapon. Documented operational use is sparse, consistent with SOE's general policy of minimal record-keeping for assassination operations. Intelligence summaries from 1944 reference several instances of collaborators or Gestapo informants killed in public spaces with no weapon found and witnesses reporting only a brief, unidentified sound. French resistance networks referred to these incidents as silences, deaths without apparent cause occurring during routine interactions. German counterintelligence reports from the period note increasing caution among Abwehr and Gestapo personnel regarding meetings with potential informants, suggesting awareness that some method of concealed assassination was in use. No captured Stinger is mentioned in German intelligence documents from the war, indicating either the weapon was successfully retained by SOE or that captured examples were not recognized as weapons. One partially documented incident occurred in Paris in February 1944. An SOE agent, identified in records only as Christine, was tasked with eliminating a French police inspector who had provided information leading to the arrest and execution of 12 resistance members. The inspector maintained careful security, varying his routes and meeting locations. Christine established contact under the guise of offering intelligence for payment. They met in a small restaurant. Christine fired the Stinger across the table during the conversation. The inspector died within minutes from a bullet that entered below his left eye and lodged in his brain. Christine left the restaurant before other diners realized anything was wrong. The incident was investigated by German security forces, but no weapon was recovered and no suspects were identified. Christine survived the war, and her identity was never publicly revealed. Comparison with other concealed weapons of the period provides context. The OSS developed the Liberator pistol, a single-shot .45 caliber weapon made from stamped metal parts. It was crude but effective and looked like a weapon, making concealment problematic. The Soviets produced various concealed firearms disguised as everyday objects, including cigarette cases and lipstick tubes. But these were typically larger than the Stinger and used conventional propellants, making them louder. German intelligence services developed small-caliber assassination devices, but prioritized poison delivery over projectile weapons. The Stinger was unique in combining minimal size, innocuous appearance, and sufficient lethality for its specific role. No other combatant nation produced anything directly comparable during the war. The limitations were substantial and eliminated the Stinger from consideration as anything more than a specialized assassination tool. The .22 caliber bullet was marginal for reliable lethality. Medical effects were unpredictable. Some targets died within seconds. Others survived long enough to raise an alarm or even physically resist. The single-shot capacity meant missing or failing to achieve immediate incapacitation left the operative defenseless. The electrical ignition system was vulnerable to moisture and battery depletion. Several agents reported misfires attributed to damp conditions or dead batteries after prolonged carry. The weapon could not be test-fired to verify its function without revealing its nature and exhausting the ammunition. Agents carried Stingers, not knowing with certainty whether they would function when needed. This psychological burden was substantial. The weapon offered no reassurance of readiness, no way to verify mechanical condition, no opportunity for familiarity through practice. The manufacturing complexity also limited deployment. Each Stinger required precision machining to tolerances that were difficult to maintain in wartime production. The aluminum body had to be drilled and threaded accurately. The electrical components had to be miniaturized and insulated reliably. The propellant charges had to be formulated consistently to produce adequate velocity without excessive pressure. Quality control was intensive. Rejection rates during production were high. By mid-1944, resources were diverted to more conventional weapons that could be produced in larger quantities. Stinger production effectively ceased after approximately 6 months of limited manufacture. Post-war analysis suggested the Stinger succeeded in its narrow intended role, but that role was so specific and the operational conditions so constrained that broader deployment was never justified. The weapon required the operative to approach within arm's reach of the target, to fire in circumstances where the brief sound would not draw immediate attention, and to withdraw before the target's death became obvious. These conditions existed primarily in occupied urban areas, where routine interactions occurred in public spaces under German observation. By late 1944, as Allied forces advanced and occupied territories contracted, these operational conditions became less common. The Stinger's moment of relevance was brief. Most units manufactured were never deployed operationally. Some were retained by SOE for post-war intelligence operations. Most were destroyed in the general demilitarization of specialized SOE equipment. No comprehensive accounting exists of how many people were killed by Stinger pencils during World War II. The weapon's purpose was the assassination of individuals whose deaths would not be investigated thoroughly by Allied forces and whose killers would not document their actions in detail. Conservative estimates based on surviving SOE records suggest perhaps a dozen successful uses resulting in fatalities. The actual number could be higher or lower by a factor of several. What is documented is that the Stinger represented an end-of-weapon design philosophy, prioritizing concealment absolutely over every other consideration, including effectiveness, reliability, and operator safety. It succeeded in being undetectable. It succeeded in being nearly silent. It succeeded in killing at close range when everything worked correctly. These successes came at the cost of almost everything else that makes a weapon practical. The operatives who carried Stingers into occupied France knew they held devices that might save their lives once or might fail at the critical moment, and they carried them anyway because sometimes the appearance of helplessness was the only tactical advantage available.